Hello, HIM 5301, Kendra Collier here again for a reading presentation. Today I'm going to go over the clinical data standards in healthcare, and in this article it reviews 5 different case studies. The author is Catherine Kim, and it was published for the California Healthcare Foundation. Here's my overview for this presentation. I'll go over what categories of the standards, who sets the standards, how the standards are being used, including a brief overview of the 5 case studies, standards of adoption, obstacles and catalysts, outcomes, key points for reading presentation, and then my references at the end. The list here acknowledges the categories of the standards for clinical data. I'll explain a little bit about each. The Data Exchange Messaging Standard allows for transactions to flow consistently between systems or organizations because they contain instructions for format, data elements, and structure. The Terminology Standards provide specific codes for clinical concepts such as diseases, problem lists, allergies, medications, and diagnoses that might have varying description in a record. Document standards are what type of information is included in a document and where it can be found. Conceptual standards allows for data to be transported across systems without losing meaningful context, losing its meaning and context. Application standards determines the way businesses' rules are implemented and how software systems interact. And finally, the architecture standards, they define the processes involved in data storage and distribution. So who sets these standards? Most were or are created by healthcare organizations, vendors, and consultants of other service entities. Development usually derives from clinical committees that establish methods around an interest. Refer to the following 2 slides, which contains a table that summarizes key standards and the organizations responsible for developing and maintaining them. On this slide, we have the standard for the data exchange messaging, and it goes into detail on the left-hand side, and the descriptions in the middle, and those developers are on the right-hand side. See that a little bit. Here on this slide, we see the standards previously mentioned listed there on the left, the description in the middle, and the developer on the right-hand side of the screen. So there's a little bit more with data exchange messaging that's continued. Then we have the terminology, document standards, conceptual, application, and architecture. How data standards are being used. Here are 5 case studies that I'll briefly go into that were screened for this article. These 5 case studies highlight different strategies for how clinical data standards are being used. The organizations which these case studies derive from are also samples from across the healthcare landscape. We have a federal research agency, a local public health agency, a private integrated delivery system, a payer-sponsored physician network, and a statewide collaborative. The Taconic IPA Independent Practice Association for 2,500 doctors in the Greater Hudson Valley affiliated with healthcare. They wanted a community-wide system that could in real time integrate data from all the hospitals and labs within their area, within their network. They created a project in 2002 with a subsidiary called MedAllies. This was to implement and provide support to physicians. The data from the hospitals and labs were consolidated in the MedAllies data repository. The portal was integrated with the hospital's medical record system to allow for electronic review and signature of transcriptions. These are the standards that were put in place to ensure for the new system. So the standards that they used on this project, the data exchange, the terminology standards, and application standards. Case Study 2, California Clinical Data Project, Setting Standards. This was a statewide project that was established for creating a uniform pharmacy and laboratory data using data standards and rules for exchange. This project used existing exchange standards and expounded from them. A previous agreement that they had resulted in no specific oversight or specifications, and medical groups received the data in multiple formats, which was a problem that they wanted to resolve. The project was initiated in 2004, and it included 2 work groups, one for the lab and one for the pharmacy, which was also completed in 2 different phases. And on the screen here we have the 2 different data standards that were used in this project. So we have the data exchange and the terminology. Case Study 3, Peace Health, which is a Catholic health ministry that operates an integrated delivery network, also known as IDN, with 6 acute care facilities in Alaska, Washington, and Oregon. The organization also has 350 employed physicians. The venture objective was for the formation of an automated group well-being record that was interoperable between offices over the continuum of care. Peace Health opted for a single vendor system that includes ADT, pharmacy, lab results, and financial and clinical documentation applications. And as with the previous case study, they use data exchange and terminology standards as well. The Washington, D.C. Department of Health, DCDOH, is the public health agency responsible for the District of Columbia. After the post-anthrax crisis in 2002, DCDOH was under intense scrutiny, and the agency felt responsible to serve as a model for the rest of the country. DCOH realized it had systematic problems, including information silos, long delays in obtaining clinical information, and incomplete planning for known and unknown hazards. The project was to demonstrate more effective bioterrorism and disease surveillance through an integrated public health infrastructure. In turn, this would enable automated public health data collection, real-time monitoring and analysis, and early detection and intervention. The impact of the clinical standards allowed for a comprehensive and timely review of potential disease outbreaks, bioterrorism attacks, and actual public health cases. A challenge for this project is that the hospitals that this trickled down to were reluctant to use an electronic interface for fear of losing control of the data, which we'll talk more about that in this presentation, and barriers. And the standards that they use that were applied to the project here, the data exchange standard, terminology, conceptual standards, and the architectural. For the 5th study, it reviews the National Cancer Institute Center for Bioinformatics, also known as NCICB, which is the division of National Cancer Institute, which is responsible for providing informatics and integration support to the cancer research community. NCICB wanted a shared cancer informatics infrastructure for researchers and clinicians that included a common architecture. It would also include standards for repository, enterprise vocabulary, open source applications, and tools for managing interoperable systems. A shared understanding of clinical data and also provides standard ways to tag and store data, and provides a centralized repository that is populated and accessed easily by the cancer research community. One of the challenges of implementing this project was based on organizational and cultural challenges. They trump the technical ones that were brought up during the time of implementation of this new technology. The standards used during this project were the terminology and the architectural standards. Next, we have the standards adoption, obstacles, and catalysts. Most of these obstacles, barriers, and catalysts, they are broad, and they cover all 5 of the case studies. As with most adoption of new technology in HIT, cost and funding is a large concern. Within these 5 case studies, financing strategies were developed to cover the cost. For example, with the Peace Health, they funded their system internally, whereas Tectonic IPA received startup funding from their sponsoring insurer. And Setting Standards, the California case study, was funded through a foundational grant for coordination and technical assistance. Another barrier is organizational culture structure. There has to be a change in organization's culture to allow electronic sharing of data to take place and to build the relationship of trust with the sharing partner, which in turn leads to another barrier of losing autonomy for an organization. This means that they are no longer the sole decision maker, and they need to have the flexibility to meet the needs for their sharing partner. Also, interoperability and leadership are also other barriers that did factor in the technology implementation. Industry catalysts include the National Infrastructure Act of 2003, which is voluntary effort to assess and recommend strategies for vetting, selecting, implementing, and maintaining standards-based information technology. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has defined a set of standards for public health infrastructure called the Public Health Information Network, also known as PHIN, P-H-I-N. While targeted at public health departments, this infrastructure is designed to integrate data from hospitals, physicians, emergency responders, epidemiologists, and the public. Here we have listed are the lessons learned by the author and the surveyor of the 5 case studies that they determined after analyzing and going through the processes for this article. Use of national standards, be informed leaders, build a collaborative culture, explore alternative financing models, use incentives to drive adoption, and to cultivate staff and knowledge. Key points for the reading presentation. What is the most important takeaway from this article? I feel that the most important takeaway from this article was showcasing the varying ways that clinical standards are being used in healthcare broadly across the field within the different organizations. And again, those different organizations, we had an example of a federal research agency, a local public health agency, a private integrated delivery system, a payer-sponsored physician network, and a statewide collaborative. They also all use a variety of strategies from a single vendor format to a custom created open source system while employing existing syntax standards for information trade and also spearheading reception of the frontline principles.